This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 370. Liz Truss Deciphered.
In order to grow, we need to change. And that starts with acknowledging that we have a problem. It means abandoning the stale economic consensus. It means politicians doing the right thing, even if it's unpopular.
This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
Well, that was Liz Truss there giving her revival speech at the Institute for Government in the UK, talking growth and how to achieve it. We will decipher what she said. And in the interests of balance, because everyone seems to give Liz a hard time, let's see if there were some things in her speech that we can actually agree with. PM for a few weeks, but sticking around like a bad smell. Okay, that wasn't very balanced. It is Liz Truss examined this week on the Debunking Economics Podcast. Me and Steve Keen. Thanks for tuning in. So Liz Truss is back, but maybe not for long. I mean, she wasn't around for very long the first time, you might remember. 49 days as Prime Minister. And a couple of weeks of that, she had to keep a low profile because of the Queen's death. You remember, we were all in mourning. We were mourning because of the Queen, but also because Liz Truss was Prime Minister. The Queen, you remember, got out of bed to greet her, and then she died shortly afterwards, not passing any comment, obviously, on that. I wonder how Charles is doing at the moment, because Liz Truss is back. She gave a speech last week trying to push her supply-side reform. Only through less regulation and lower taxes can Britain see growth, and that growth will create prosperity from which we will all benefit, ladies and gentlemen, rich and poor, old and young. Yes, trickle down is back, baby. Embrace it. But we have been ground down by stale economic consensus, she says, and she's going to change that. If only she can regain power, which obviously seems a bit unlikely. We'll look at what she had to say. I mean, are there some good bits, even in the overall picture, which is perhaps a little deluded? Steve, can we find some good in all of this? I mean, she talks about the economic consensus that is not working. She says 25 years of economic consensus. What do you think she means by economic consensus? Because the majority of those 25 years obviously have been a Tory government, and she is a Tory politician. So there we are. Deluded fact number one.
Yeah, I know that just blew me away. I mean, it's incredible how people make up their own histories, and we all do it to various extents. It's a question, to what extent do we check that against historical data? And like, I date the beginning of neoliberalism back to 1975, because you take a look then. We've had the inflationary period beforehand. Milton Friedman was suddenly ascendant. The central banks all around the world thought they could control inflation by controlling the rate of growth of the money supply, with no awareness, of course, at the time that there are two sources of money creation, the private banks and the government, not just one. They thought controlling government money creation would cut inflation, and by having low inflation, we would have a successful growing economy, and we would also simultaneously reduce the scale of government, because the whole idea was the government got too big. And they were focusing on the level of government debt, not focusing on the fact that it's the ratio of government debt to GDP that matters, trying to cut back government spending. That's been going on for nigh on 50 bloody years.
Yeah.
And like the only thing which you could, you dive in. Yeah.
Well, I mean, because she's declaring that it's not working. Actually, what she's advocating is
we agree. She's right. It's not working.
Yeah. Well, is Britain broken? So I think it was time to coincide with her speech. Lord Ashcroft has this polling company showing that 72% of people in Britain agree that Britain is broken. People are getting poorer. Nothing seems to work. And we need big changes in the way that the country works. Whichever party is in power, we need that to change. Only 22% said Britain is not broken. But those that say it's not broken is higher amongst Tory voters. So 38% of Tory voters say, no, everything's fine. Over 65s, 36% say, no, it's not broken. Leave voters, 29%. And those who intend to vote at the next election for the Tories. So here's the big divide. This shows how political lines are being separated now. 54% of those people who intend to vote for Tory at the next election are saying, yeah, Britain is not broken. So old, bolted on Tories are less convinced that things are going wrong. But 72% of the broad population think things are not on a good track.
And that's actually a nice contrast to Truss's speech. I mean, saying that the left wing has won. I mean, if the left wing had won, it'd be the Labor Party who were making those sorts of comments, or what there's to the extent that you can regard the British Labor Party as left wing. Of course, I know that's a bit weird, but yeah, it's the right wing voters who think things are going well, and the reason is, fundamentally, it's going better for them than most other people for the impact that right-wing policies, or let's say neoliberal, not necessarily right-wing, neoliberal policies have had on the distribution of income. Yeah, if you're at the top of the scale, you're going to be doing pretty well. And fundamentally, all the agenda has been about small government, getting the government out of the private sector's way, yada, yada, yada. The rhetoric and the objective has been exactly what Liz Truss wants to continue. So the fact she sees herself as being a revolutionary is, in terms of changing the direction of policy and the dominance of who dominates policy setting. I mean, I was wondering if Groucho Marx was in the audience giving her cues.
Well, I think she thinks that maybe
not Karl Marx.
Definitely not Karl Marx. Yeah. No, I think she thinks Friedman has not been applied sufficiently. It's one of those things. If it's not working well, then it's not being done properly. I think that's her thinking. But listen, let's have a listen to her.
The fact is that since Labour was elected in 1997, we have moved towards being a more corporatist social democracy than we were in the 80s and the 90s. State spending now accounts for 46% of GDP, higher than it was in every year in Britain except for 1975, and up from 34.8% in the year 2000. No other European country has seen this level of growth in state spending apart from Greece and Spain.
Well, can we agree with that then, Steve? Number one, so our state spending as a proportion of GDP is going up. What's going on there?
What's actually going on? Have you got people trying to apply a set of concepts about a system, which is wrong, to the real system? And that tends to have perverse effects. So it's like if astronomers are trying to shoot to the moon or to Mars when they believed in epicycles, they're unlikely to land on the planet. And then this is what's going on here. You've got a totally false view of how the economy operates. You implement policies based on that false view, and that will have perverse effects on how the system actually functions, which will come back to you and say, oh, we didn't do it well enough the last time around. And the classic, and this is the one I want to just start off with, I'll have others later on, is the idea that the government is borrowing from the private sector when it spends more than it gets back in taxation. When you do the accounting, and it is simply accounting, left, right wing or upside down wing, if you do the accounting, you find out that the government is not borrowing, it's creating money. So if you try to limit that, then you're limiting the amount of money that's available for the private sector to do all the things you want the private sector to do, which means private sector organisations are going to go bust, particularly if you start privatising public enterprises as well and having them running under the same situation. And lo and behold, the government's going to go in and pick up the pieces to some extent. And you're therefore going to have a rising amount of government spending, not because you're doing too much. You're trying to remediate the damage you've already done by trying to do too little.
Yeah, that's right. So you'll have rising government spending against falling GDP. Whereas, I mean that is the approach, isn't it? Do you get growth by cutting down on government spending, or do you get growth by increasing government spending and therefore seeing GDP rise faster? And then perhaps that ratio will reduce because you're getting the growth that she's looking for. Fundamental issue, isn't it? Her approach is, yes, you'll get growth by the government spending less.
Yeah. And what you're doing is the government spends less, it's creating less money. There's less money in the economy. People go and borrow money from the banks instead because, you need cash for, just to stay alive in a capitalist economy, you've got to have some money. So you go, rather than having government money creation, which just turns up and doesn't reduce your net worth, actually increases it, you go and borrow from the banks. And then you've got a debt you have to repay. And you can't pay your debts anywhere into the government. You don't have the government's capacity to create money to service any interest payments that are due. So you end up spending less rapidly, and the rate of turnover of money drops and GDP falls. And you can have the perverse effect that by trying to cut the level of government spending, you actually cut the rate of turnover of money and the creation of GDP more, and the ratio rises. And this is what's going on. They've got to, and they'll never see it because they have. If you try to understand what's happening with media yours and you believe in Ptolemy's system, you ain't never going to get there. And that's the problem they've got. They believe in what I prefer to call these days Ptolemaic economics rather than neoclassical.
So, and the numbers support that. So when the Tories took over in 2010, they did reduce state spending as a proportion of GDP. It went down from 46% when they took over down to below 40% just before the pandemic. So let's ignore the pandemic because that's a whole different set of circumstances. But of course, that taking it down from 46 to 40 did sod all for economic growth. So we averaged over that 10 years about 0.5% growth per quarter in GDP in the build up to the pandemic. When Tony Blair was Prime Minister from 1997 to 2000, quarterly GDP averaged 0.7%, sometimes over 1%. So, helping your argument, more state spending seems to have helped GDP, not reduced it.
Okay. Look, I'll just, for a change, let me give you some numbers. So in that database that I put together to compare rates of growth between 1945 and 1975, which 30 years you can call dominated by Keynesian policies, and then 75 to 2015. So the next 30 years dominated by neoliberal policies. Now, Milton Friedman wasn't dominant in the first period. He was in the second. Growth in America went from 3.2% per annum on average under the Keynesians to 1.9% under Milton Friedman neoliberalism. And that pattern is repeated through every country in the database. So neoliberalism caused a lower rate of growth, and now they're trying to cure it by doing more neoliberalism.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, maybe there's some things that we can find that she is right on. Let me give you some.
That'll be a challenge. That'll be fun. Okay, yeah.
I mean, the observation might be right. It's what she wants to do about it might be wrong. So regulations, the cost of regulations introduced in 2022, she says, is £10 billion, according to the government. And I believe that is an underestimate in the sectors that are key arteries of the economy, whether it's energy, housing and banking. There is less competition and more government involvement than there was 25 years ago. The government still owns a 40% stake in NatWest. The cost of energy in Britain is twice what it is in the United States. And we have a severe shortage of housing. Is it regulations that's creating those problems, do you think?
No, it's policies that are designed on the wrong model of how capitalism functions. And this is, so if you have a wrong model and you apply it to the real world, you're going to get perverse results, which you'll then blame on not doing it well enough. And you continue, what was the old saying that beatings will continue until morale improves? And that is similar here. Maybe you should stop the beating. And the whole idea of trying to reduce the size of the government directly by spending less, having a lower government deficit, actually has the perverse effect of causing GDP to fall faster. And therefore your debt level rises and you blame the rising debt on too much government spending. It's actually too little, because without government spending being reduced, you have less fiat-based money in the economy, more credit-based money. People are more worried about paying their debt back. They spend more slowly, and GDP falls faster than you cut government spending. So sometimes you've got to do something with what people in complex systems calls obliquely. You don't try to do it directly. Directly will undermine what you're trying to do. You do the opposite to some extent. And my analogy here is if you're an amateur driver, and I classify myself as an amateur driver, if you go into a roundabout and you're going too quickly, you start to skid. What's my response? I turn in the direction I want the car to go to. What happens? The car skids even more. The expert drivers, and it goes completely against your own emotional reactions,
is to turn
into the skid.
Yeah.
And they put the power up. So an expert does the oblique approach and doesn't crash, and the amateur does the instinctual approach and crashes. Right. And what she's being is instinctual here, and that's typical of Tories.
Well, it's interesting because when we're talking about regulation, you're thinking, well, okay, is it regulation that is making the cost of energy in Britain twice what it is in the United States? Well, not really, because we've privatized all of our energy. I mean, you could argue it's actually the opposite. Yeah. You're turning the steering wheel exactly the wrong way. Housing, well, I mean, housing, almost certainly it is a supply side issue. But perhaps we need more regulation to fix that.
No. It's actually a demand side issue, because that's the Tories deregulated lending for housing. So you went from private debt being roughly 70% of GDP before it was deregulated to 200% after. Most of that rise being an increase in mortgage debt, which drove up house prices, also made it more unaffordable. So again, this is focusing upon the wrong issues. If you read from the neoliberal Tory handbook, you don't even worry about when people borrowing money to buy housing. That's what's causing the bubbles. So again, it's getting the causal factors
and the
wrong.
government getting out of NatWest?
Well, they only got into the private banking sector because they got out of the banking sector and let it do what it damn well wanted to do, and you then got the Ponzi scheme of the subprime and so on, and a crash. So yeah, if you get out of the way, but also prevention is better than cure. This is one of the few little homilies that anybody left or right will happily spout. If you prevent things, it's a downside cheaper than having to cure them afterwards. What happened is they let it rip, and now they're in cure mode, and of course the level of government spending has gone up as a result.
She wants to go after pensions as well. So the cost of welfare and pensions has ballooned by 50% in real terms since the turn of the millennium. She says what she doesn't mention is most of that is pensions, not welfare. So pensions of 204 billion in the fiscal year 2024, 66 billion in the year 2000. So in real terms, that's almost doubled. But the population is aging. So in the 2001 census, there were 8.3 million people aged over 65. In 2011, that had gone up to 9.2, and then in 2021 it shot up to 11 million. So it's up by a third in those 20 years. We're close to 1 in 5 people now being aged over 65. So actually taking a fifth of the population and saying, well, actually we're going to cut the amount of money that you've got because we think that's going to increase the amount of money being spent in the economy. Not quite sure how that works.
Yeah, and like the pensioners and students are two groups that you can actually regard as being sources of monetary demand for the economy, as long as the money is there, as long as they get the money in the first place. So you've got a demand deficiency.
Yeah, pensioners are not putting money aside for their pension. What they've got is they're spending.
Well, they have to. I mean, the thing is they're not earning. I mean, it's the whole idea that you can save enough for your retirement is fine if you're rich. Again, all this stuff comes down on the side of damaging the poor and the people without assets. And, if you don't spend on medical services, then Rupert Murdoch is still going to be able to find a surgeon somewhere, maybe an entire hospital. But the poor, you don't have the operation, you carry that forward and you're disabled for the future, and you've got the extra medical costs coming out of that. So this penny pinching approach to saving ends up reducing the number of pennies in circulation and making it look like it's getting more expensive every year. It's just a recipe for disaster. But that seems to be what the UK
is focused on.
Enjoys.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, just as an aside, this is interesting. The European Social Survey asked people in various countries what they considered old age. When does it kick in? In the UK, they said it kicks in at 59. In Greece, 68. So I'm a spring chicken in Greece. When does youth end? We say it ends at 35. They say it ends at 52. There's this big attitude towards age across Europe. I just, an interesting aside. Another thing she says, our tax system has become more complicated. And actually, I sort of agree with her on this one. So someone earning £100,000, which is a bit of money, it's well above average, but there's an increasing number of people hitting this bracket. Someone earning £100,000 with a student loan faces a marginal tax rate of 71%. What she didn't mention, which makes it even worse, is you've got 20% VAT on top of that as well. So if you earn 100,000, the next 10,000, you get to keep 3,000 of that. And then if you buy stuff, you spend all of that, then that's another 600 that's going in consumption tax, basically. So you earn 10,000.
That's including a student loan, though.
Including the student loan. Yeah, okay. We'll take it down from 71% to 60%. It's still, you're still paying a great deal more. But yeah, I mean, the whole student loan thing's a bit of a crazy thing anyway, isn't it? But the point is, you get to that 100,000 and really there's no incentive to spend. Or you could say to earn, I think people would carry on earning, wouldn't they? They'd just put more into pensions to try and keep, because that's tax deductible. But the idea that if you earn 10,000, you have less than 2,500 after tax is just a nonsense, isn't it? So I agree with her on this one.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the perspective from modern monetary theory, which on this point I completely agree with them, is the taxation is taking excess government money out of circulation. But doing it through income tax is possibly one of the most aggravating and annoying ways to do it. And this is the problem. When you are individually having money taken out of your account, that itself is an irritation. And then, of course, if you're somebody, let's say your name is Lord Sugar, for example, you take yourself out of the country to avoid paying the tax. So there's all sorts of ways the rich can evade paying that income tax, whereas the poor can't. And what ends up being, you're alienating certainly the middle class of your potential political supporters by taking money out of them all through the income tax system. I'm largely in favour of things like transaction taxes, or the best thing of all, the gazillion currency, which depreciates on its own, to reduce that potential excess government money creation. But yeah, it's a politically it encourages a right-wing attitude towards everything.
Yeah, but tax is complicated and it is a minefield, and there are lots of loopholes.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Lord Sugar. I mean, he would have got away with it. It wasn't for that.
Oh, there's somebody called Lord Sugar. Oh, right. Okay, sorry.
Didn't you? So he would have got away with it. It wasn't for that pesky House of Lords. But I mean, he was there trying to basically running a company, a limited company. He'd accrued a great deal of money, so he'd paid corporate tax on it over the years. It just sits in your bank account. And you can't take it out because you've got to pay dividend tax, which if you take out a slug of money can get quite high, so like 30% or whatever. So he just spends a year out of the country, claims himself non-resident, and takes as much money out of his company as he wants without paying any tax. So there's ways of avoiding all of this, but you can only do that if you earn so much within a private company to have made it worthwhile. So the fact that you can cheat the system like that is it just shows what a nonsense the tax system is. So complicated, she said. It does hit people at a certain level rather sharply, but there's ways of evading it as well. There's got to be a simpler tax system. So on that, I might actually agree with Liz Truss.
Yeah, and I do too, in the sense that the income tax is the most irritating and inefficient and burdensome way of taking money out of circulation. We've got to find a better way.
There we are. One of them. There we are. So
but I don't think she's likely to come up with it.
Okay, just one though. We just wanted one thing that we agreed with her on, whether how she's going to implement it. Another thing, maybe you'll agree with her on this as well. Here she is talking about banks.
And we've had cheap money for over a decade, with nearly £900 billion pumped into the system by the Bank of England through quantitative easing in an era of near zero interest rates, something that's completely unprecedented in 300 years of UK central banking. So how on earth did we get to this situation?
So she thinks they've done too much. QE, creating money being pumped into the system by the Bank of England. Not a big supporter of all of that.
On that one, we can agree again, because QE was basically inflating the private assets in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. And what they should have done is reduce private debt. So I completely agree on that one. And QE has been an ineffective means of trying to stimulate the economy. And again, that's following a failed set of concepts about the economy, how the economy operates. And you can't blame neoliberalism directly for that. It's really the naivety that mainstream economists have about money creation, where they actually believe, and you can find quotes from Ben Bernanke on this front, that if they ran up the reserves that banks had, and that's what happens when you buy bonds off, the central bank buys bonds off the banks, even off the non-banks, it increases the amount of reserves that the banks have compared to the bonds. And they believe that lend those out. And that is mathematically impossible unless all loans are in cash. So again, it's a false concept of the monetary system that causes the problem that she's complaining about. So for one, she's got the right monkey by the tail this time.
Yeah, but I think for the wrong reasoning, I suspect. I think she's just thinking, well, it's creating too much money in the economy, and that's flooding the economy, and that's creating inflation.
Well,
I'm sure
she thinks it's worked the way they thought it would, and it's been bad. And it hasn't worked the way they thought it, and it's been bad.
Right, look, we're a bit late taking a break, so we'll do that now. So, what does she want to do about all of this? What's her plan? We'll look at that when we come back in just a second on the Debunking Economics podcast. Me and Steve Keen, back in a moment.
This is the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
So, Steve, we are looking at Liz Truss. She gave a speech about how she wants to be. Please, 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 can I be Prime Minister again? Because I was right when I tried to grow the economy last time. It's just, that people have forgotten, the words of Milton Friedman. And, if we all read his book, we'd understand. That seems to be what she's saying.
She actually did say that. She actually said, we can't imagine everybody's read Milton Friedman. The pity is too many people have, including including her.
That's right, and believes every word of it. So she says after the successful monetary policy and the supply side reforms of the 1980s and the winning of the Cold War by the West, we were all optimistic and upbeat about our future, and we took our eye off the ball. Free market economists went off for lucrative jobs in the city, allowing academic institutions, that's people like you, Steve, and think tanks to be captured by the left. Demand management crept
that is just priceless.
So
Jesus Christ.
Demand management crept back in alongside neo-Keynesian dominated monetary policy, and we conservatives allowed the debate to be framed and led by the left, whether it was the anti-capitalist arguments of the Occupy movement, whether it was the diversity with Kerry policies. I'm not quite sure what she means by Kerry policies, except there was, when she was Prime Minister, it's not, sort of like government by Bindi Baji. The rebel MPs got together over Kerry to try and figure out how they were going to oust Liz Truss. It was called the Poppadom plot. So maybe she's talking about the policies that those people are coming out to. Whether it's that, the anti-capitalist arguments of the Occupy movement, or whether it was the statist environmental solutions, that is the problem. And that's what she's fighting against.
Yeah, the whole idea that left-wing economists took over, the intriguing thing, I am a left-wing economist, and I am protesting about the mainstream, which is right-wing. I know a lot of economists would object to being called right-wing because they think they're socially progressive. That's the problem. They combine socially progressive social ideas to some extent with textbook false model of how the economy operates. So they think, the classic is they think banks lend out reserves. And the Bank of England itself finally came and said, well, that's actually wrong. The politicians still believe it, and the policymakers in the banks still believe it. So it is just, to me, laughable that is believed, that the left wing has won. In fact, I saw Nathan Tankus put a tweet out in response to, who's that right-wing American commentator that's now on Twitter?
Oh, the Rupert Sack, Tucker Carlson you're talking about, I think.
He came out and said the left has won, and the left is organised. The left doesn't dispute with itself. The left makes up a position and makes sure nobody deviates from it. Holy hell! Is that if you actually been to any left-wing meeting... It's an absolute joke. The left is stabbing itself in the back all the bloody time, can never agree on anything. And I've been in those meetings. I've seen the sorts of farces that occur, and the picture from somebody like Truss or
Tucker.
It's the bubble they're in that sees the world through the lens of the social bubble, and they actually believe that the left is dominant. Give me a break.
So, the fundamental difference is, though, that what she says is driving the agenda in the left is the belief that growth is going to go on forever. So the focus is on how you share out the pie, not how to grow the pie. And she reckons the pie is not growing because of the greater involvement, here we go again, by the state. That's hitting productivity, but there's not enough incentive to go out to work or to take risks. And she says the Treasury's forecasts and the Office of Budget Responsibilities forecasts, which are predicting low growth, she says, underestimate the effect that tax and regulation has on people's behaviour. This is what she calls abacus economics. So it's the whole thing about, if we just provide more incentive, the pie will grow, but we've got far too focused on how we can create a more equitable society. That's it. That's their big bugbear.
In England.
In England, I know, where we have just seen growing disparity in income to extraordinary levels. Huge. People are at food banks. I know, it's a shock.
And this is the whole problem about people living inside their own political and social bubbles. And what you're getting is, and we saw this with the Morrison government in Australia, with the same. And the Liberal Party in general, which, of course, for those who don't know, is a conservative party in Australia. And they, by preaching to their own crowd, they reinforce their perspective on why things have gone wrong, which, when you stand back and take a look at the whole system, can just be completely back the front, completely arse about tit, to use an Australian expression. So it is amusing to some extent to imagine that this is common conversation amongst wealthy right-wing politicians and commentators, that they think the left is organised. I'll give you an example. I'm going to give a little personal example here of organisation of the left. sort of nonsense that occurs. When I was conservative in my economic groups up to the age of about 18, and then saw through the logical problems in it, I politically shifted, and I ended up being interested in anarchist philosophy. And like one of my best friends was the anarchist David Graeber, who a very, very different person to the people I'm about to ridicule here. But there were anarchist conferences organised, which itself is a funny concept. The thing is, people would say they couldn't even decide to have a chairman, and that's true. So this meeting, a 3-day conference on anarchist philosophy in Sydney, spent the entire 3 days arguing over whether there should or should not be a chairperson for discussions. And I ceased being an anarchist in the middle of it, saying it just attracts loonies.
Yeah,
but that's
well.
typical.
I mean, surely there wouldn't. For anarchists, there
can't
can't be anyone in control. Surely you can't.
My perception was, and my perception, what I'm going to do it to you now here, is that a strong speaker like me would, if without a chairman, will dominate. So you need a chairman to people like me to STFU.
That's why I'm here.
And control the discussion and give other people a chance. And that was perfectly logical, but no, one bloke actually, and I can see it vividly. It's so funny. He stands up and says in this quaky little voice, whenever two people get together to make a decision, that's authoritarian. Oh my God, let me out of here. And they think the left is organised.
Well, they are, and they are the problem. So, and she's going to fix. She's going to fix
all
it.
The left, the organised left.
Yeah, exactly. That's they're everywhere. They're in the media. Bloody Rupert Murdoch with his socialist ideas. Folks.
He's the lefty, obvious lefty.
All those lefties in the city, as well as those traders there. Just moving money around with the ulterior motive of trying to create a more equitable outcome for society. They are everywhere, aren't they?
They're in for equality.
So, that's right. Property developers, they're obviously keen to make sure that housing is offered in the lowest possible price so that it's affordable to everybody. All through society, we're seeing that. So to get the British economy on a better trajectory, she's got a 3-pronged approach, she says. Targeted tax freezes and reductions, supply side reform, and holding down public spending. So cutting the higher rate of tax would increase revenue, she reckons, because it would make Britain more attractive to investors.
Can I laugh at that? A laugher? Or... So sorry, that's the economic.
Yeah, the whole Laffer curve. That is completely it, isn't it?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she is completely Laffer. I mean, to the point that she points to Donald Trump, who had the same argument that if you basically introduce tax cuts, then ultimately you're going to have more money for public services because you're going to get much more tax revenue in because there'll be more people working, there'll be more investment from overseas. All of this miraculously is going to work. It didn't work for Donald Trump, did it? And in fact, the Brookings
didn't work
Institute,
for Reagan either. I mean, that is in some sort of sense a semi-oblique, obliquity type of approach. Cut tax to increase tax type thinking. But practically when Reagan did it, you had the biggest government deficits for quite some substantial time, and you got a booming economy out of it. The deficit actually caused more money in circulation and the economy boomed. But it was the opposite of what Reagan thought would cause it.
Well, the Brookings Institute, which is hardly a left-wing think tank, their take on Donald Trump was that it created a budget shortfall, it made the distribution of income more unequal, and had a marginal impact on GDP, if anything at all. So yeah, just made things worse was their conclusion. So there's and they're not left wing. So another thing she wants to do: get rid of the windfall tax on energy companies. But she, like Rishi, obviously wants to open up the North Sea as well for more oil exploration. I mean, that is happening because you can make a lot of money from fossil fuels. Did you know that? And the windfall tax deterred investment in the North Sea, basically. So yeah, invest in fossil fuels, energy dependence, forget the environment. I mean, that is clearly part of her philosophy. And obviously, Rishi Sunak sees that as a vote winner too. I mean, they've just pushed back the deadline for buying petrol cars. You can buy them in 2035 now in the UK. It's been pushed back 5 years. And then it'll be pushed back another 5 or 10 after that, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, this is what's, trying to be slightly less facetious for a change. This is what is a terrifying, to me, prospect for the future we face, because having politicized all the stuff, which is based on scientific analysis, the greenhouse effect, I think, was first established in 1850, and our knowledge about this is based on solid science. And the trouble is people who are making these decisions see everything through the lens of politics and economics, which is anything but solid science. And they believe all this stuff is left wing when it's based on a sound idea of what's going to happen to the biosphere if we don't stop pumping not just carbon dioxide, but all the other waste and pollutants we dump in the system. And at some point, so far as I know, the planet itself is neither left nor right. Okay, it's just correct. It's what's going to come back at us, and we're going to see.
It's left wing, Steve. Yeah. The planet's left wing.
Which way does it spin? Yeah. Okay.
I don't know, but it's. I mean, look, it's there. It's trying to, it's providing, providing for everybody. Yeah. It
goes right to left, but it depends. If you're standing up, let's say you're standing in the bottom and looking at it from that direction. We're going to pay the price for politicizing everything and getting the politics based on a fallacious analysis of how the economy operates and most importantly, how it interacts with the biosphere. And this is going to be a devastating price, and it's coming our way. And I'm the more I see the sort of nonsense we do in things like this, a person with her views, once having been prime minister and getting the sort of forums she gets, we are not at all prepared for what's coming our way, left, right, or whatever. And that is the scary thing about all this.
Yeah, but what you're talking about is on behalf of the Anti-Growth Coalition, Steve, which is a powerful force.
Ah, there we go, yeah.
You are part of the economic and political elite, the corporatist parts of the media. Obviously, that's this podcast, and even a section of the Conservative Parliamentary Party is that they are the members of the Anti-Growth Coalition, and the policies she advocates are not fashionable on the London dinner party circuit, but she says, according to the Ashcroft poll, that those who want smaller government and lower taxes tend to live in less affluent areas. So it's the rich elite that are forcing these socialist policies on everybody, whereas those people who actually need a leg up are the ones saying, no, we don't. We want less government, less regulation, and we go Liz. It's hard to believe, isn't it? Look, some quick one-liners to finish off with.
Yeah.
Some,
sure.
Some of the other good ones. I mean, net zero. That's all gone. The government needs to divest its shares in banks and withdraw from micromanagement in sectors like transport. Because the transport sector, which has been privatised, that's worked so well in the UK, hasn't it? Another one, more competition and less corporatisation in key sectors of the economy like energy and finance. More competition in energy, which has been obviously open to competition, doesn't seem to have worked very well. For example, we got rid of all our gas storage as part of that because it costs too much. More competition in finance. Is that going to work? And raising the retirement age further to deal with the rising pension cost. So ideally, to a point at which beyond which everyone's still alive. You can, we'll take the average age and we'll push the retirement age a couple of years above that. So that's all going to save money and decrease regulation.
And we'll live happily ever after. And more fantasies.
In Truss land.
More fairy tales.
But it is interesting how, if you look at that Ashcroft poll, how the Tory party voting is shifting. So she is her approach is very much obviously the heartland of the Tory party of old. So there was a statement that people were asked about: should people provide for themselves and not expect the government to provide for them? So I think that's quite a defining statement actually as to where your politics lie.
Yeah, it is definitely.
45% of those who voted Tory in the last election and 49% of those who intend to vote Tory agree with that, compared to 8% of those who voted for Labour. So 49% versus 8%. That shows how that is the fundamental difference between parties, between Tories and Labour. And she's playing to that. I mean, Boris was a bit too much Labour in his approach because I don't think he did agree with that. And in the Ashcroft poll, what party do you think is more likely to keep taxes as low as possible for workers and families? You'd assume the Tories, wouldn't you? But this is the problem we've got. 34% said Labour, only 14% said Conservatives. That's the problem the Tory party has got. There's a whole load of people saying, yes, we think that people should be able to look after themselves. But then on the other side, there's a whole load of people who are saying, but also we think taxes should be kept low to enable that. And people think Labour is going to do a better job at that than the Tory party are. So that's their problem. Even if you take this agenda that they've got, they're not delivering it very well.
And that's the thing. You can't deliver an agenda when you don't understand the system you're trying to deliver the agenda with. And that's why this is such a mess. The one thing I can completely agree with, that Britain is broken, and ideologies like hers are a large part of the reason why.
Yeah, well, good point to leave it on. The problem is, of course, for Britain and for a lot of the rest of the world, there's nobody with an alternate agenda who is in any position of power or likely to attain any position of power. We need, just as she's saying, we need people to have read Milton Friedman. We need a few more people to read your books, perhaps.
And the limits to growth. And the limits to growth. That's the important book. They'll be ignored, derided, and then they're going to be proven correct. And then we're going to say, oh, we should have taken them seriously.
Yeah. But that was 1974, was it? Something like that?
72, 73.
Right.
50 years ago. Okay.
Shocking.
So, that's over which period of time we've probably increased our load on the planet by a factor of 4, certainly a factor of 3. And this if any problem is at the root of why we make mistakes like we're making now, and I've forgotten the mathematician who made the point, it's the point where you simply don't understand the exponential function. When you've got compounding growth upon growth upon growth, it's ridiculous how rapidly you increase your load on the system, and it simply can't be maintained. Exponential growth will stop, and we're getting very close to the point where that's going to be proven. Whether you're left or right, it's a lesson we're all going to learn.
Right. That aside, and I'm not denying that is the significant issue. I've almost given up, actually, to be honest with you. The more I see that we seem to be veering away from any progress in that direction, I've almost given up and said, well, okay, the planet's going to go wreck and ruin, which was your approach a while ago, and I was giving you a hard time over it. But I can see your point now. As time marches on, we seem to be getting further and further away from solving the problem. But that aside, let's push that to one side. She's saying, we can't assume people have read Milton Friedman. So we need to spell out the philosophy that sits behind Milton Friedman's work. If there was one book that you'd say, well, okay, if you're going to read Milton Friedman and you want the alternative viewpoint, what would you say is the easy to read? Not that Milton Friedman says it necessarily easy to read. What would you say is the book that everyone should read to try and get a handle on this?
Well, actually, probably go for Harger and Chance, 23 Things They Don't Teach You About Capitalism. But my stuff tends to be too analytic. You're going to read my stuff. You're going to get your head bent by trying to follow logical arguments and maybe a bit of mathematics here. Harger and Chance is more accessible, so I'd say that's the one people should read.
Yeah, and it's a good, easy read, and it's fun as well. So yeah, absolutely. Okay, very good. All right, let's leave it there for now. I think we've seen the end of Liz Truss, not through our work. I think she's done a good demolition job on herself anyway. But that is interesting, isn't it? Because there she is, sort of like giving that hard line neoclassic approach, and people aren't liking it, even within the Tory party. So maybe the tide is turning.
Hopefully.
All right. Catch you next week, Steve.
Okay, mate. Bye.
Now, next week, we're hoping to get Nick Hanauer on the podcast. He's the man behind Pitchfork Economics. He's got a brilliant podcast by that name as well. He's got a new book out called Corporate Bullshit, Exposing the Lies and Half-Truths that Protect Profit, Power and Wealth in America. That sounds like fun, doesn't it? We'll talk about that hopefully next week if we can get him lined up next week on the Debunking Economics podcast. That's it from me and Steve for now. Thanks for listening.
The Debunking Economics podcast.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.